The boulder broke free from the canyon wall with a sound like thunder splitting the earth, and Willa Zimmerman looked up just in time to see her death coming. She had been crouched low beside a cluster of rare evening primrose, her leather journal open across her knees, pencil scratching notes about the delicate yellow petals that only bloomed in this particular stretch of New Mexico territory. The year was 1878, and she had traveled all the way from Boston to catalog the unique plant life of the desert Southwest. Her fingers were still dusty with pollen when the first small stones began to rain down around her, pattering against the dry earth like hail. Then came the grinding, terrible roar of stone against stone. Willa threw herself backward, her journal flying from her hands, papers scattering like frightened birds. The massive boulder, easily the size of a covered wagon, was tumbling down the steep canyon wall above her, dislodging dozens of smaller rocks in its path. She scrambled on her hands and knees, her split skirt tangling around her legs, her wide-brimmed hat falling across her eyes. The shadow of the rockslide fell over her, blotting out the fierce afternoon sun. She would not make it. The thought came to her with absolute clarity. After 23 years of life, after defying her parents to pursue her passion for botany, after crossing half a continent to study the flora of this wild desert, she would die here in this nameless canyon, crushed beneath tons of ancient stone. Then something hard and strong caught her around the waist, lifting her bodily from the ground. The world spun in a blur of blue sky and red rock. She felt herself flying through the air, pressed against something solid and warm that smelled of leather and sage and horse. They hit the ground together and rolled, once, twice, 3 times, coming to rest behind a jutting outcrop of sandstone just as the boulder crashed into the exact spot where she had been kneeling moments before. The impact shook the ground like an earthquake. Dust exploded upward in a choking cloud, filling the air with grit. Smaller rocks continued to clatter down around them, pinging off the outcrop that sheltered them. Willa found herself pinned beneath a man's body, his arms wrapped protectively around her head, his chest heaving against hers as he caught his breath. They lay that way for several long moments, waiting for the avalanche to finish. Willa could feel the man's heartbeat, strong and steady despite the exertion. Her own heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Slowly, the rain of stones subsided, the rumbling faded, and the dust began to settle. The man lifted his head, and Willa found herself staring up into the most striking pair of eyes she had ever seen. They were gray-green, like storm clouds over prairie grass, framed by sun-creased lines that spoke of years spent outdoors. His face was all hard angles and stubbled jaw, darkened by sun and wind. A few strands of dark hair had escaped from beneath his dusty black hat to fall across his forehead. "You hurt?" His voice was low and rough, urgent with concern. Willa tried to speak but found her throat too dry. She shook her head instead. "Can you move your arms, your legs?" She flexed experimentally and found everything working, though her whole body felt bruised and her hands were scraped raw. "Yes," she managed to croak. "Yes, I think I am all right." He rolled off her carefully, rising to a crouch behind the outcrop, his eyes scanning the canyon wall above them. "We need to move. The whole cliff face is unstable. Can you stand?" Willa nodded and accepted his outstretched hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm as he pulled her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, whether from fear or from the dizzying sensation of his touch, she could not say. She found herself reluctant to let go of his hand. "My journal," she said suddenly, looking back at the chaos of scattered papers and crushed plant specimens. The boulder had landed directly on her collection bag. My research. Better your papers than your life, madam. He was already tugging her away from the outcrop, moving swiftly along the base of the canyon wall toward where his horse stood waiting, ears pinned back nervously. We can come back later if it is safe. Right now we need distance between us and that wall. Willa stumbled along beside him, her boots sliding in the loose gravel. She caught sight of a few pages from her journal, scattered among the rocks, sketches of prickly pear and desert marigold already being buried by the settling dust. Months of work, lost in an instant. But he was right, of course. She was alive, and that was no small miracle. The cowboy's horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes, danced sideways as they approached. "Easy, Copper," the man said, his voice dropping to a soothing murmur. "Easy, boy, it is over now." He kept one hand on Willa's elbow as he reached for the reins with the other, steadying both woman and horse with the same calm confidence. "Can you ride?" he asked her. "Yes, but my mule is back there, tied near the canyon entrance. We will get her once we are clear of this area. For now, you are riding with me." Without waiting for agreement, he swung up into the saddle with fluid grace, then reached down for her. "Give me your hand." Willa hesitated only a moment before grasping his forearm. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, settling her across the saddle in front of him. She had to sit sideways, her legs dangling over one side, and she found herself pressed back against his chest as he urged Copper forward at a swift trot. They rode in silence for several minutes, putting distance between themselves and the unstable cliff. Willa was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. His arm around her waist, holding her secure, the solid wall of his chest against her back, the slight brush of his breath against her hair when he leaned forward to look past her. Her mind felt strangely blank, shocked into silence by how close she had come to death, and by the unexpected intimacy of being held in a stranger's arms. Finally, when they had rounded a bend and were well clear of the canyon, he slowed Copper to a walk. "There is a stream about a quarter-mile from here," he said. "We should stop, let you clean those scrapes and catch your breath. You saved my life." The words came out shakier than she intended. "Thank you seems wholly inadequate, but thank you." She felt rather than saw him shrug, a shift of muscle against her spine. "I happen to be in the right place, or you happen to be in the wrong one, depending on how you look at it. What were you doing out here alone anyway? This is not exactly a place for Sunday strolls." "I am a botanist," Willa said, lifting her chin despite her disheveled state. "I came to New Mexico to study the native plant species. That canyon has several varieties that grow nowhere else in the territory." "A botanist," he repeated, and she thought she heard a note of surprise in his voice. "From back east, I would guess, by your accent. Boston. I have been in Las Cruces for 3 months now, documenting the local flora." She paused. "I suppose I should have been more careful about my surroundings. The desert has its dangers. Rockslides, flash floods, rattlesnakes, heat that can kill you in a few hours without water. It is not a forgiving place for the unprepared." His tone was matter-of-fact rather than condescending. "But it is beautiful in its way. I can see why you would want to study it." They reached the stream, which was little more than a trickle between sand-colored banks, shaded by a few scraggly cottonwoods. The cowboy dismounted first, then helped Willa down. Her legs were steadier now, though her hands had started to sting where the skin was scraped raw. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and uncorked it, offering it to her first. "Drink slowly." Willa did as instructed, the water cool and sweet on her tongue. She had not realized how parched she was until that moment. When she had taken several careful sips, she handed the canteen back and knelt beside the stream to wash her hands. The water ran pink with blood and gritty with dust. The cowboy crouched beside her, pulling a surprisingly clean handkerchief from his pocket. "May I?" At her nod, he took one of her hands in his and carefully patted it dry, examining the scrapes. His touch was gentle, clinical, but Willa felt heat rising to her cheeks nonetheless. "Not too deep. They will heal clean if you keep them covered. Do you have supplies in town?" "Yes, at the boarding house where I am staying." He nodded and moved to her other hand, repeating the process. "I am Zachary Reeves, by the way. I have a small ranch about 5 miles east of Las Cruces. I was tracking a couple of stray cattle when I saw you working in that canyon. Something about the way you were focused on those flowers, completely unaware of your surroundings, made me uneasy. Figured I should keep an eye on things from a distance. Good thing I did." "Willa Zimmerman," she replied. "And yes, very good thing. I owe you my life, Mr. Reeves." "Zachary is fine." He finished with her hands and stood, offering his arm to help her up. "We should get you back to town. The sun will be setting in a few hours, and you have had enough excitement for one day." "My mule," Willa said. "And I should at least try to recover some of my research, if it is safe." Zachary studied the sky, then the distant canyon wall, his expression thoughtful. "The angle of the sun should tell us if there is more loose rock. We can make a quick pass, but I am not letting you linger there." "Agreed." "Agreed." They rode double back toward the canyon entrance. Willa once again held secure in front of Zachary on his saddle. She found herself relaxing into his steady presence, no longer quite so flustered by the contact. There was something reassuring about his calm competence, the way he handled both horse and situation with quiet capability. Her mule, a patient gray jenny named Sage, was right where Willa had left her, tied to a twisted juniper and looking thoroughly bored with the whole affair. Zachary dismounted and checked the mule over quickly, then untied her lead rope. "You stay here with the animals," he said. "I will see what I can salvage. But it is my research, and you nearly died for it once today. I would rather not have you take that risk again." His gray-green eyes held her steadily. "Please, let me do this." There was something in his gaze, a genuine concern that made Willa's protest die on her lips. She nodded slowly. "Be careful. Always am." He handed her Copper's reins and Sage's lead rope, then walked back toward the Rockslide site with long, purposeful strides. Willa watched him go, her heart in her throat for reasons that had nothing to do with her own safety now. She studied him as he moved through the scattered debris field, noting the breadth of his shoulders beneath his sun-faded shirt, the confident way he carried himself despite the obvious danger. He was not a young man, she thought. Probably somewhere in his early 30s, with the bearing of someone who had learned to rely on himself in difficult circumstances. Zachary worked quickly and efficiently, eyes constantly scanning the cliff face above, as he gathered what papers he could find. Most of her journal pages were lost or destroyed, but he managed to collect perhaps a third of them, along with her battered pencil case and one of her collection bags that had been thrown clear of the boulder. He returned to her after only a few minutes, his arms full of salvaged materials. "This is all I could safely reach," he said, tucking the papers into his saddlebag. "The rest is either buried or too close to unstable ground." "You recovered more than I expected," Willa said honestly. "Thank you again." "You can thank me by getting on that mule and riding back to town without argument." But there was a hint of warmth in his voice that softened the command. Willa mounted Sage with practiced ease, settling into the side saddle position with her split skirt arranged as modestly as possible. Zachary swung back onto Copper, and they set off at an easy pace toward Las Cruces, riding side by side through the long shadows of late afternoon. "How long have you been ranching in New Mexico?" Willa asked, partly to distract herself from replaying the terror of the Rockslide and partly because she found herself genuinely curious about this man who had appeared like Providence itself to save her life. About 8 years now. I came out from Texas after the war, looking for land and a fresh start. Found both, more or less. He paused. It is a hard living, especially these last few years with the drought, but it is mine. That counts for something. You ranch alone. I have 2 hands who help with the cattle and horses, Miguel and his son Carlos. Good men, reliable. Otherwise, yes, I run the place myself. He glanced over at her. What about you? You said you have been here 3 months, planning to stay longer. That depends on my funding, Willa said with a sigh. I have a small grant from the Natural History Society in Boston, but it only covers 6 months of expenses. I have 3 months left and so much work still to do. The plant diversity here is extraordinary. I have documented over 200 species already, and I feel as though I have barely scratched the surface. 200 species, Zachary repeated, sounding impressed. I knew there were a lot of different plants out here, but I never thought to count them. What exactly do you do with all that information? I am compiling a comprehensive botanical survey of the region, Willa explained, warming to her favorite subject. Detailed descriptions of each species, their habitat preferences, their uses for medicine or food if applicable, seasonal variations. I make sketches and press specimens to send back east. Eventually, it will be published as a reference work for other scientists and for settlers who need to know which plants are safe and which are poisonous. That sounds like important work. It is. Willa felt a rush of gratitude at his understanding. So many people, especially men, dismissed her research as frivolous or unnecessary. Lives could be saved if people knew which plants had medicinal value and which would kill them. Livelihoods could be improved if ranchers understood which native grasses provide the best forage. There is so much knowledge here, in the land itself, if we only take the time to learn it. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the horses' hooves clopping steadily on the hard, packed trail. The desert stretched around them in shades of gold and amber, dotted with sage and creosote bush. In the distance, the Organ Mountains rose like dark teeth against the pale sky. You must think me foolish, Willa said eventually, risking my life for a few flowers. No, Zachary said firmly. I think you are dedicated to your work. Nothing foolish about that. Maybe a little too focused for your own good, but not foolish. The world needs people who care about things beyond just surviving day to day. We need people who see beauty and want to understand it, preserve it. That takes courage. Willa felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, surprised by her own emotional response. Perhaps it was the shock of the day's events catching up with her, or perhaps it was simply that no one had ever spoken about her work with such unaffected respect. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you might realize. They crested a low rise, and Las Cruces came into view below them, a sprawl of adobe buildings and dusty streets nestled in the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance, Willa could hear the faint sounds of commerce and life. Hammer on anvil from the blacksmith shop, the lowing of cattle in the stockyards, the shouts of children at play. Nearly there, Zachary said. Where is this boarding house of yours? On Mesa Street, near the plaza. The proprietress is Mrs. Henderson, a widow from Missouri. She runs a respectable establishment. I know it. I will see you safely to the door. As they descended into town, people turned to stare at the unlikely pair, the dusty cowboy on his buckskin horse and the disheveled Eastern lady on her gray mule, both covered in dust and clearly having been through some ordeal. Willa kept her chin high. refusing to be embarrassed by her appearance. She was alive, after all. That was what mattered. They drew up in front of the boarding house just as Mrs. Henderson herself was sweeping the front steps. The older woman looked up, and her eyes went wide with alarm at the sight of Willa's torn clothes and scraped hands. "Merciful heavens, Miss Zimmerman, what happened to you?" "A rockslide in Dripping Springs Canyon," Willa said, dismounting with only a slight wince. "I would have been killed if Mr. Reeves had not been nearby to pull me clear. I am bruised but otherwise unharmed. Mrs. Henderson's hand flew to her chest. "A rockslide? Oh, you poor dear. Come inside at once. We need to get you cleaned up and into bed. And you, young man," she addressed Zachary, who had also dismounted, "you have my eternal gratitude for saving our Miss Zimmerman. She is a treasure, truly." "It was my privilege, madam," Zachary said, tugging his hat politely. He retrieved Willa's salvaged papers from his saddlebag and handed them over. "Your research materials. I am sorry I could not save more." Willa took the bundle, clutching it to her chest. "You saved the most important thing, Mr. Reeves. Me. The rest can be redone, given time." He met her eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, some wordless acknowledgement that they had shared something significant today. "You take care of those hands," he said. "Keep them clean and wrapped until they heal." "I will. And maybe stay out of unstable canyons for a while." Willa found herself smiling despite everything. "I make no promises, but I will be more cautious. That is all I can ask." He hesitated, as though wanting to say more, then seemed to think better of it. With a final nod to both women, he swung back into his saddle. "Ladies, I bid you good evening." Willa watched him ride away, sitting tall and straight on his buckskin horse, one hand raised in farewell. She realized with a strange pang that she did not want him to go, that the thought of returning to her quiet room and solitary research felt suddenly lonely. "Come along, dear," Mrs. Henderson said gently, taking Willa by the elbow. "Let us get you inside. You have had quite the shock. A hot bath and a good meal will help." Willa allowed herself to be led into the boarding house, but she glanced back once more at the street. Zachary had turned the corner and disappeared from view. She had not even properly thanked him, she thought. Had not found adequate words for what he had done. But perhaps words were not enough anyway. Perhaps no words could properly express the debt she owed to the quiet cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and changed the course of her life in the span of a heartbeat. The hot bath Mrs. Henderson prepared did help, as did the hearty meal of beef stew and cornbread that followed. By the time Willa finally climbed into her narrow bed that night, clean and bandaged and fed, exhaustion was dragging at her like a physical weight. But despite her weariness, sleep was slow to come. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her, and found her thoughts returning again and again to Zachary Reeves. The feel of his arms around her as they rolled clear of the rockslide, the surprising gentleness of his hands as he tended her scrapes. The way he had spoken about her work with such genuine respect and understanding. She had met many men in her 23 years, most of them fellow academics in Boston who looked down on her pursuits or tried to patronize her with faint praise. A few had courted her half-heartedly, but none had understood the fire that drove her to seek knowledge, to push beyond the boundaries that society said should contain a respectable young woman. Zachary had understood, she thought, or at least he had not dismissed her passion as foolishness. That alone set him apart. Willa turned onto her side, wincing slightly as her bruised body protested. She would have to find a way to thank him properly, she decided. Perhaps she could visit his ranch, bring him some small gift as a token of her gratitude. It was only proper, after all. Only right to acknowledge such a debt. The fact that the thought of seeing him again made her heart beat faster had nothing to do with it. Nothing at all. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sky that endless blue that Willa had come to associate with New Mexico. She woke stiff and sore, every muscle reminding her of yesterday's ordeal, but her mind felt sharp and determined. After breakfast, she carefully sorted through the salvaged papers Zachary had recovered, assessing the damage to her research. It was not as bad as it could have been. She had lost perhaps half of her field notes from the past month, and several of her best sketches were gone entirely, but the core of her work remained intact. Most importantly, her master catalog, which she kept in her room rather than carrying into the field, was safe and complete. Willa spent the morning reorganizing her notes and planning her next excursion. She would have to return to Dripping Springs Canyon eventually to complete her survey of that area, but perhaps not alone and not for a few days while her hands healed. In the meantime, there were other locations closer to town that she had been meaning to investigate more thoroughly. But even as she worked, her thoughts kept drifting to Zachary. She found herself wondering what he was doing at that moment. Whether he was out on horseback checking his cattle, or working in his barn, or sitting down to a midday meal. She wondered if he had thought of her at all since yesterday, or if rescuing wayward botanists was so routine for him that he had already forgotten about her. That thought stung more than it should have. By afternoon, Willa had made up her mind. She would ride out to his ranch tomorrow, she decided. It was the proper thing to do, to thank him again in person and perhaps learn a bit more about the man who had saved her life. Mrs. Henderson could give her directions, surely. Las Cruces was not so large a town that people did not know their neighbors, even those who lived on outlying ranches. She was just putting away her papers when a knock came at her door. Mrs. Henderson stood in the hallway, her round face flushed with exertion. "Miss Zimmerman, you have a visitor." "That cowboy from yesterday, Mr. Reeves. He is waiting in the parlor and asking after you." Willa's heart gave an unexpected leap. "He is here. Come to check on how you are healing, I expect. Shall I tell him you will be down?" "Yes, of course. Tell him I will be there in just a moment." Willa glanced at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, dismayed by her appearance. She had dressed practically for working with her papers, in a plain brown skirt and simple white blouse, her hair pinned up in a hasty knot. She quickly smoothed her hair and pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them, then felt foolish for the vanity. This was a courtesy call, nothing more, but she found herself hurrying down the stairs nonetheless. Zachary stood by the window in the parlor, hat in hand, looking decidedly uncomfortable in the fussy, feminine space with its lace curtains and floral upholstery. He turned as Willa entered, and his expression eased into something that might have been relief. "Miss Zimmerman, I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to see how you were faring after yesterday." "Not intruding at all, Mr. Reeves. I am grateful for your concern." Willa held up her bandaged hands. "Mrs. Henderson dressed my scrapes properly, and aside from some spectacular bruises, I am quite well." "Thanks entirely to you." "I am glad to hear it." He hesitated, turning his hat in his hands. "I also wanted to apologize. I realized after I left yesterday that I took your mule along with me by mistake. She is back at my ranch. I was planning to return her today, but then I thought perhaps you might want to collect her yourself, see that she is being well cared for. If you are up to the ride, that is." Willa blinked in surprise. In all the confusion and exhaustion of yesterday evening, she had completely forgotten about Sage. "Oh, yes, I should retrieve her. I have supplies and equipment in her packs that I will need for my work. If you are free now, I could escort you out to the ranch. It is not far, perhaps an hour's ride. You could see the place, have lunch with me and my hands, and then I will make sure you get safely back to town before dark." It was a perfectly reasonable suggestion, a practical solution to the problem of the mule. But Willa could hear something else in Zachary's voice, a note of hopefulness that suggested this was about more than just returning a borrowed animal. He wanted her company, she realized. He wanted to spend more time with her. The realization sent a warm flutter through her chest. "I would like that very much," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Just let me get my riding gloves and hat." 20 minutes later, they were riding out of Las Cruces together, Willa on a rented horse from the livery stable since her own mule was at their destination. It felt different riding beside Zachary in the full light of day, both of them calm and unhurried rather than fleeing from danger. Willa found herself more aware of him somehow. The easy way he sat his saddle, the competent handling of his reins, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings with the alertness of someone who had learned to read the land. "Your ranch," Willa said as they followed the trail east out of town. "What do you raise there?" "Cattle mostly, some horses. I have about 300 head of cattle right now, down from 400 last year. The drought has been hard on the grazing land. I have been supplementing with hay when I can afford it, but it is not easy. As for horses, I breed working stock, nothing fancy. Sturdy animals that can handle the desert climate and the rough terrain. It sounds like difficult work. It is, but it is honest work and I am my own boss. After the war, after taking orders and seeing what I saw, that mattered to me more than ease or profit." He glanced at her. "I expect you understand something about choosing a difficult path because it is the one that calls to you." "I do," Willa agreed quietly. "My parents wanted me to marry well and settle into a comfortable Boston society life. When I insisted on pursuing my botanical studies instead, they were horrified. My father stopped speaking to me for nearly a year. My mother still writes letters trying to convince me to give up this foolishness, as she calls it, and come home to find a suitable husband before it is too late. But you are still here." "I am still here," Willa confirmed. "Because this work matters to me more than their approval or society's expectations. Though I confess, there are times when the loneliness is difficult. I have few friends here, and the academic community back east is skeptical of a woman doing field work. Sometimes I wonder if I am fighting an impossible battle." Zachary was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I do not know much about the academic world," he said finally, "but I know something about impossible battles. During the war, we fought plenty of those. Some we won, some we lost, but the men who kept going were the ones who believed in something bigger than themselves. You believe in your work. You believe it has value and purpose. That is not foolishness, no matter what anyone else says. That is courage." Willa felt that prick of tears again, the same overwhelming gratitude she had felt yesterday when he had spoken so respectfully of her research. "You are a rare man, Zachary Reeves," she said softly. "Most men would not see it that way. Then most men are fools." He said it simply, as a statement of fact rather than flattery. "Ah, there is the ranch just ahead." The Reeves ranch came into view over a low rise, and Willa leaned forward in her saddle to get a better look. It was a modest operation, clearly built with care but without unnecessary ornamentation. The main house was adobe, low and sturdy, with a covered porch facing east to catch the morning sun. Behind it stood a barn, a corral with several horses and various outbuildings. Beyond those, cattle dotted the landscape, grazing on the sparse desert grass. It was not a grand place, but there was something appealing about its simplicity and honest function. This was a home built by someone who valued practicality and hard work over show. Two men emerged from the barn as they rode up, both dark-haired and sun-weathered, obviously Mexican. The older one raised a hand in greeting. "Boss, you are back. We were starting to worry you had gotten yourself into trouble." "Nothing I could not handle, Miguel. This is Miss Willa Zimmerman, a botanist from Boston. She had a run-in with a rockslide yesterday, and I brought her mule back here by mistake. Miss Zimmerman, this is Miguel Herrera and his son Carlos. They keep this place running when I am too stubborn to ask for help." Miguel grinned at that, revealing a gold tooth. "Someone has to look after you, boss. You work too hard and eat too little." He turned to Willa and swept off his hat politely. "A pleasure to meet you, señorita. Your mule is in the barn, very well fed and rested. She seems quite content." "Thank you for taking care of her," Willa said warmly. "I appreciate it. Any friend of the boss is welcome here," Miguel said. "Carlos, help the lady down from her horse. Boss, Maria sent lunch with us today. There is more than enough for 4 if you would like to eat now." Zachary dismounted and came to help Willa down before Carlos could reach her. His hands at her waist were warm and steady, and he lowered her to the ground with the same easy strength he had shown when pulling her from danger. Willa found herself reluctant to step back from his proximity. "Lunch sounds good," Zachary said, not quite meeting Willa's eyes. "Miss Zimmerman has had a difficult couple of days. She could probably use a decent meal." They ate in the shade of the porch, seated on rough wooden chairs around a plank table that had clearly seen years of hard use. The meal Miguel unpacked was simple but delicious. Tortillas wrapped around beans and shredded beef, fresh tomatoes from someone's garden, and crisp peppers that made Willa's eyes water in the best way. The conversation flowed easily, Miguel and Carlos sharing stories about ranch life and the latest news from town. Willa learned that Carlos was newly married, his wife Maria the one who had prepared their meal. She learned that Miguel had worked for Zachary since the beginning, helping him build the ranch from nothing but land and ambition. "The boss, he saved my life once," Miguel said, his expression growing serious. "5 years ago there was a stampede. A rattlesnake spooked the herd, and I was in the wrong place when they ran. Zachary rode into the middle of that chaos and pulled me out. Broke his arm doing it, but he got me clear. I have been loyal to him ever since, and I will be loyal until I die." Willa glanced at Zachary, who looked uncomfortable with the praise. "You seem to make a habit of rescuing people," she said lightly. "I just try to help where I can," Zachary muttered. "No point in having the skills and not using them." After lunch, Miguel and Carlos excused themselves to return to their work, leaving Willa and Zachary alone on the porch. The afternoon was growing hot, the sun beating down with relentless intensity, but the shade provided relief, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sage across the land. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" Zachary asked. "It is not much, but I am proud of what we have built here." "I would like that very much." He gave her a tour of the property, showing her the barn where her mule was indeed looking content and well-rested, the chicken coop that provided eggs, the small vegetable garden that struggled against the dry climate but managed to produce enough to supplement their diet. He pointed out the well that was his most valuable resource, never having run dry even in the worst of the drought. "Water rights are everything out here," he explained. "More wars have been fought over water than gold in this territory. I was lucky to find land with a good well and a reliable spring about a mile north. As long as those hold out, I can keep going." They walked together toward the corral where several horses stood in lazy contentment, tails swishing at flies. Zachary rested his arms on the top rail, his gaze fond as he watched the animals. "That bay mare there, the one with the white blaze, I raised her from a foal. Sweetest disposition you will ever find in a horse. And the paint gelding next to her, I won him in a card game 3 years ago. Best hand I ever played. He glanced at Willa with a slight smile. Do you ride much? I learned as a girl, though the riding I did in Boston was quite different from what is required out here. Side saddle on groomed trails through civilized parks. Nothing like navigating canyon trails and desert terrain. You handle yourself well enough from what I have seen. Takes real skill to manage that mule of yours over rough ground. Sage and I have reached an understanding, Willa said with a laugh. I do not ask her to go anywhere too foolish, and she does not throw me off. It is a practical arrangement. They stood together in companionable silence for a while, watching the horses and the play of shadows across the land. Willa was intensely aware of Zachary beside her, close enough that she could see the small scar at his temple, the sun-bleached tips of his dark hair, the strong line of his jaw. She found herself wondering what it would feel like to reach out and touch his hand, to close the small distance between them. I am glad you are all right, Zachary said suddenly, his voice low and rough. Yesterday, when I saw that boulder coming down and you directly in its path, I have never moved so fast in my life. The thought of not reaching you in time, of seeing you crushed. He stopped, his jaw working as he struggled with the words. It would have been a terrible loss. To the world of science, certainly, but also just a loss. You matter, Willa Zimmerman. I want you to know that. Willa's breath caught in her throat. There was something raw and honest in his words, an emotion that went beyond simple concern for a stranger's welfare. You matter too, she said softly. You are a good man, Zachary, better than you perhaps give yourself credit for. He turned to look at her then, his gray-green eyes searching her face as though looking for something he had lost and hoped to find again. I feel like I should apologize, he said. I have no right to speak to you this way, to feel what I am feeling. You are an educated woman from a good family back east. I am just a cowboy scratching out a living in the desert. We come from different worlds. Different circumstances, Willa corrected gently. But I do not think our worlds are as far apart as you believe. We both chose hard paths because they called to us. We both value honesty and purpose over comfort and convention. That seems like more common ground than many people ever find. Maybe so. Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and carefully took one of her bandaged hands in his. I would like to see you again, Willa. Properly, I mean. Not just returning lost mules or recovering from disasters. I would like to court you if you would allow it. Willa's heart soared, even as her practical mind immediately began raising objections. She was here temporarily. Her research would take her to remote locations. She had no intention of settling down and becoming a rancher's wife. But none of those logical concerns seemed to matter when she looked into Zachary's eyes and saw the hope and vulnerability there. I would like that, she heard herself say. Very much. Though I should warn you, I am not looking for a conventional courtship. I will not give up my work, and I cannot promise to stay in New Mexico forever. My funding will run out in 3 months, and I may need to return to Boston to secure more support for my research. I am not asking you to give up anything, Zachary said firmly. I am asking only for a chance to know you better, to spend time with you, to see where this might lead. No promises, no expectations beyond that. Just two people who find themselves drawn to each other, taking it one day at a time. It was such a reasonable, honest proposal that Willa found herself smiling. I think I can agree to those terms, Mr. Reeves. Zachary, he reminded her, squeezing her hand gently. If we are courting, it should be Zachary. Zachary, she repeated, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. And you must call me Willa. Willa. He said it softly, almost reverently, and then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face into something warm and open. "It suits you. Strong and graceful like the willow trees back in Texas." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, smiling at each other like fools, until Miguel's distant shout about a loose fence post broke the spell. Zachary stepped back reluctantly, though he did not immediately release her hand. "I should get you back to town soon," he said. "The afternoon is wearing on, and I promised Mrs. Henderson I would have you home before dark." "Did you promise her, or are you just being cautious?" "A bit of both," Zachary admitted with a grin. "That woman is fierce when it comes to protecting her borders. I would not want to cross her." They retrieved Sage from the barn, loading her with the equipment Willa had left in the packs, and then set out on the return journey to Las Cruces. The ride back felt different from the morning trip, charged with the awareness of what had shifted between them. They talked more freely now, Zachary sharing stories of his ranch and his life, Willa describing her research in more detail. "So you actually count every petal and measure every stem?" he asked, fascinated despite himself. "For a proper scientific description, yes, precision is important. Two plants might look similar to the casual observer, but small differences in their structure can indicate they are entirely different species. Or they might be the same species with variations due to their environment. The only way to know for certain is careful measurement and observation." "That sounds painstaking." "It can be, but there is also something meditative about it, about giving that kind of focused attention to a living thing. You start to see patterns you would have missed otherwise. You begin to understand how each plant has adapted perfectly to its environment, how every feature serves a purpose. It is beautiful, really, in a way that has nothing to do with just the colors or shapes." Zachary nodded slowly. "I think I understand that. When you work with horses or cattle, when you really pay attention to them, you start to see the same thing. How they communicate with each other, how they read the weather before we can, how they know instinctively where the water and good grazing are. There is a kind of wisdom in creatures that live close to the land." "Exactly," Willa said, delighted by his understanding. "That is exactly it." They talked until the walls of Las Cruces came into view, and then Zachary fell quiet, seeming reluctant for the afternoon to end. When they reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, he dismounted and helped Willa down, then personally saw to getting Sage settled in the small stable out back. "Will you have dinner with me tomorrow night?" he asked as he walked her to the front door. "There is a restaurant in town, nothing fancy but the food is decent and they have tables where we could talk." "I would like that," Willa said. "What time?" 7 o'clock. I will call for you here." 7 it is. Zachary hesitated, then took her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles just above the bandages. "Until tomorrow, then, Willa." She watched him walk back to his horse, her hand tingling where his lips had touched. She was still standing there, feeling slightly dazed when Mrs. Henderson opened the door behind her. "That is quite a man, Miss Zimmerman," the older woman said knowingly. "Quite a man indeed. Will you be receiving his attentions?" "I believe I will," Willa said, unable to stop smiling. "Yes, I believe I will." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of happiness unlike anything Willa had ever experienced. True to his word, Zachary courted her properly but unconventionally, adapting to her needs and schedule rather than demanding she conform to traditional expectations. He took her to dinner that first night, and they talked for hours until the restaurant owner had to politely inform them he was closing. They discovered shared opinions on everything from politics to literature, though Zachary was quick to point out that his education had come from experience rather than formal schooling. "I can barely believe some of the things you have read," Willa said when he mentioned his familiarity with Shakespeare and Emerson. I would not have expected a rancher to be so well versed in literature. Long winters alone give a man plenty of time to read, Zachary replied with a shrug. And my mother was a schoolteacher back in Texas. She made sure I understood that working with your hands did not mean you had to let your mind go to waste. I have maybe a dozen books at the ranch, and I have read each of them half a dozen times. On the third day of their courtship, Zachary surprised her by offering to accompany her on her botanical expeditions. Not to help with your work, he clarified quickly, but to keep watch. Make sure no more rockslides catch you unaware. I will stay out of your way, but at least I would be there if trouble came. It proved to be an ideal arrangement. Zachary would ride with her to whatever location she had chosen, help her set up her equipment and collecting supplies, then settle himself a short distance away where he could keep an eye on their surroundings while she worked. Sometimes he would doze in the shade, hat pulled low over his eyes. Other times he would do small tasks like mending tack or sharpening tools he had brought along. But always he was there, a steady, quiet presence that made Willa feel both safe and respected. And in the evenings, when her work was done and her notes were written up, they would sit together on the porch of his ranch or walk through the streets of Las Cruces, talking about everything and nothing. She learned about his time in the war, which he spoke of rarely and with obvious pain. She learned about the dreams he had for his ranch, his hopes of building something lasting that could survive the harsh desert climate. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Boston, about her fascination with plants that had started in her mother's garden, about the professors who had encouraged her when most people dismissed her ambitions as unsuitable for a woman. She told him about the loneliness of being the only woman in her field of study, about the constant need to prove herself twice as competent as any man would have to be. You should not have to prove anything, Zachary said fiercely when she described being turned away from research positions because of her gender. Your work speaks for itself. Anyone with eyes can see the quality of what you do. You see it, Willa said softly, but you are not like most men. Then most men are blind. It was during the third week of their courtship that Willa realized she was falling in love with him. The recognition came not in some grand romantic moment, but in a quiet instance of simple domesticity. They were at his ranch, and she had stayed through dinner. Afterward, Zachary was washing dishes while Willa sat at the table organizing her field notes. He was humming tunelessly under his breath, his sleeves rolled up, soap suds on his forearms. She looked up from her work and was struck by the rightness of the scene. The two of them together in his modest kitchen, each occupied with their own tasks but sharing the space comfortably, naturally. This was what life could be like, she thought. Not her giving up her work to become merely his wife, but the two of them building something together, supporting each other's dreams while creating a shared home. The realization should have frightened her. She had always insisted she did not want a conventional life, did not want to be tied down by marriage and domesticity. But this did not feel like being tied down. It felt like finding a partner who understood her, who saw all of her ambitions and all and loved her for it rather than in spite of it. What is that look? Zachary asked, glancing over his shoulder and catching her staring. What look? That soft, thoughtful expression. You look like you just figured out the secret to some botanical mystery. Maybe I did, Willa said, her heart beating faster. Maybe I just figured something out. Zachary dried his hands and came to sit beside her at the table. Care to share your discovery? She should be cautious, Willa thought. She should protect her heart and not speak too soon. But looking into his eyes, she found she did not want to be cautious. Life was too short and too uncertain, as the Rockslide had taught her. Sometimes you had to reach for happiness while you could. I think I am falling in love with you, she said simply. I did not expect it, did not plan for it, but there it is. I love you, Zachary Reeves. For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into a smile so wide and genuine that it made him look years younger. "Thank God," he said. "I have been in love with you since I pulled you out from under that boulder. Maybe even before that, when I was watching you work and thinking how beautiful you looked when you were focused on something you cared about. I was afraid to say anything, afraid I would scare you off." "You could not scare me off," Willa assured him. "Not now." Zachary reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against her skin. "May I kiss you, please?" Willa whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Willa's eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Willa Zimmerman. I want you to know that, whatever happens, whatever you decide about your work and where you need to go, that will not change. I love you, and I will support whatever choices you make." "I love you too," Willa said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones like something fundamental and unshakable. They sat there in his kitchen, arms around each other, as the sun set outside and the desert night descended. Neither of them spoke about the future or the complications that would inevitably come. For this moment, it was enough simply to be together, to have found each other against all odds, and to know that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The conversation about the future came 2 days later. Willa had been carefully tracking her expenses, and the numbers were not favorable. Her grant money was running low faster than expected, primarily because she had been forced to pay for a new set of field equipment after the Rockslide destroyed her original supplies. She had perhaps 6 weeks of funds remaining, 8 if she was very frugal. She sat at her desk in the boarding house, reviewing her budget for the 3rd time, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They did not. When her money ran out, she would have to return to Boston and seek additional funding, which could take months or might not come at all. The Natural History Society had already indicated they were skeptical of extending her grant, citing the high cost and limited immediate applications of her work. A knock at her door interrupted her worried calculations. Mrs. Henderson peeked in. "Mr. Reeves is here to see you, dear." "Shall I send him up, or would you prefer to come down?" "I will come down," Willa said, quickly tucking her financial records into a drawer. She did not want Zachary to see how dire her situation was becoming, did not want him to feel obligated to help or, worse, to suggest she give up her work. But Zachary took one look at her face when she entered the parlor and immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it? What has happened?" "Nothing new," Willa said, trying to smile. "Just the same old problem, money, or rather the lack of it. My funding situation is becoming critical." Zachary frowned, his jaw tightening. "How critical?" "I have perhaps 2 months left if I am very careful with every penny. Then I will have to return to Boston and try to secure more support. There is no guarantee I will be successful, and even if I am, it could be a year or more before I could return to complete my work here." "That is unacceptable," Zachary said flatly. "Unacceptable or not, it is the reality of my situation. Research requires resources, and I do not have wealthy patrons willing to support my work indefinitely." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Then he said, "What if I funded your research?" Willa blinked at him. "What? The ranch is doing well enough. Not rich by any means, but we have a good year with the cattle sales, and I have some money set aside. What if I became your patron? covered your expenses so you could complete your botanical survey without having to return to Boston. Zachary, I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering. He took her hands in his. Willa, your work is important. It deserves to be completed. And selfishly, I do not want you to leave. I want you here with me. If I can help make that possible, then I want to do it. Willa felt torn between gratitude and pride. It feels wrong to take your money. Why? If we were married, we would share resources. We would support each other's work and dreams. Why should we not start doing that now? We are not married, Willa pointed out, though her heart was racing at his casual mention of marriage. Not yet, Zachary agreed, but I hope we will be eventually, when you are ready. In the meantime, consider this an investment in your work and in our future together. That is a significant investment, Willa said slowly. My expenses run about $75 per month, including the boarding house, supplies, equipment, and my mule's feed. If I need to stay another 6 months to complete the survey properly, that is $450, possibly more. Zachary did not even flinch at the sum. I have it, and I want to spend it this way. On something that matters, on someone who matters. Let me do this, Willa, please. She wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to insist on maintaining her independence. But practicality warred with pride, and more than that, she recognized the gift he was offering, not just money but faith in her and her work. He believed in what she was doing enough to sacrifice his own financial security for it. That was no small thing. On one condition, she said finally. I will keep careful accounts of every penny I spend, and when I complete my research and publish my findings, I will repay you from the royalties. This is a loan, not charity. A loan, then, Zachary agreed, though his smile suggested he had no intention of ever collecting. Do we have a deal? We have a deal. Willa threw her arms around his neck, overcome with relief and love. Thank you, Zachary. You have no idea what this means to me. I think I do, he said softly, holding her close. It means I get to keep the woman I love here with me. That is worth any amount of money. With her financial concerns temporarily resolved, Willa threw herself into her research with renewed energy. The late summer and early autumn in New Mexico provided perfect conditions for fieldwork. The worst of the summer heat had passed, but the plants were still in full bloom, preparing for the cooler months ahead. Zachary accompanied her on most of her expeditions, sometimes bringing Miguel or Carlos along if they were heading to particularly remote areas. The men proved surprisingly interested in her work, asking questions about the plants she studied and sharing their own knowledge of which ones were used in traditional medicine or cooking. My grandmother, she made a tea from these leaves, Carlos said one day, pointing to a plant Willa had been examining. For stomach troubles. Always worked too. Willa carefully noted this information in her journal. This is exactly the kind of traditional knowledge that needs to be preserved. The native peoples and the Mexican families who have lived here for generations have learned through experience what many of these plants can do. That wisdom should be documented and shared. You should talk to Maria's grandmother, Carlos suggested. She knows more about desert plants than anyone I have ever met. She could tell you things no book would ever teach you. And so Willa's research expanded to include interviews with the local Mexican families and the few Pueblo people who lived near Las Cruces. She found them generous with their knowledge once they understood. She was genuinely interested in learning rather than judging or dismissing their traditional practices. An old woman named Rosa, who had lived her entire 80-some years in the New Mexico territory, spent 3 afternoons with Willa, walking slowly through the desert and pointing out plants and their uses. This one, we call it Romero, good for the lungs when you cannot breathe well. This one, Osha, The root is powerful medicine, but you must use it carefully. This one Mormon tea, the cowboys drink it when they have no coffee. Willa sketched and took notes frantically, trying to capture every detail. Zachary often sat nearby during these sessions, listening as intently as she was, occasionally asking his own questions. She loved that about him, his genuine curiosity and respect for knowledge in all its forms. "You are good at this," Zachary told her one evening as they rode back to town. "Not just the scientific part, but the way you talk to people. You listen to them like what they have to say matters. A lot of folks from back east do not do that. They think anyone who is not educated in their schools does not know anything worth learning." "That is the arrogance of formal education," Willa said. "I spent years in classrooms learning from books written by men who had never set foot in the places they were writing about. Out here, I am learning from people who have lived this land for generations. Their knowledge is just as valid, maybe more so in practical terms. Any scientist who does not recognize that is a fool." Zachary reached over and squeezed her hand. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," Willa said with a smile, "but I never tire of hearing it." As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened and settled into something comfortable and enduring. They had established routines: breakfast together twice a week at the ranch, dinner in town every Sunday, long rides through the desert as Willa conducted her research. They had also become a known couple in Las Cruces, acknowledged and accepted by the community. Mrs. Henderson made no secret of her approval, often leaving them alone in the parlor for longer than strict propriety would usually allow. Miguel and Carlos treated Willa as though she were already family, joking with her and looking to Zachary with knowing grins. Even the shopkeepers in town began to assume they would marry, asking Willa questions about her plans for the ranch house as though it were a foregone conclusion. The assumption made Willa nervous at first. She still worried about losing her independence, about being subsumed into the role of rancher's wife, and having to give up her botanical work. But Zachary seemed to sense her concerns without her having to voice them. "You know I am not trying to trap you into some conventional life you do not want," he said one night as they sat on his porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "If we marry, and I hope we will, it will not mean you have to stop being who you are. Your work matters to you and to me. I would never ask you to give it up." "What would it mean, though?" Willa asked. "Marriage, I mean. What would that look like for us?" Zachary considered the question carefully. "I suppose it would look like what we are already doing, but with more commitment. You would have a home here at the ranch whenever you wanted it, but I would not expect you to be here all the time if your work took you elsewhere. We would support each other, share our lives, build something together. Maybe have children eventually if you wanted them. But it would be a partnership, Willa, not me telling you what to do or expecting you to fit into some mold. A true partnership." "Children," Willa repeated softly. She had not let herself think much about children, had assumed her choice to pursue botany meant choosing against motherhood. "I confess I have always been uncertain about that. I want my work to matter, to make a difference. How could I do that with children to care for? The same way you do it now, just with help. Miguel's wife would probably be thrilled to help with childcare, and I would be there too. My work is flexible in ways many men's is not. If you needed to go into the field for a few days, I could manage things at home." He paused. "But that is all far in the future. Right now, I am just asking if you can see yourself building a life with me. The details we can figure out as we go." Willa turned to face him fully, studying his features in the fading light. This good, honest man who had saved her life and then stayed to steal her heart. This man who believed in her work and her dreams, who never made her feel as though she had to choose between love and ambition. How could she not want to build a life with him? Yes, she said simply. I can see it. I want it. I want you, and I want the life we could have together. Zachary's face broke into that wide, genuine smile she loved so much. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Willa's breath caught. I have been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Maybe there is no perfect moment, but this feels right. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone set in the center. It is not much, he said. I cannot afford diamonds or fancy jewels. But turquoise is from this land, from this place where we found each other. I thought it was fitting. It is perfect, Willa whispered, her eyes filling with tears. It is absolutely perfect. Willa Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner, and let me spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams and loving you with everything I have? Yes, Willa said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, Zachary, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, with a passion that made her toes curl and her heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. I promise you will never regret this, he said fiercely. I will spend every day of our lives making sure you know you made the right choice. I know I did, Willa assured him. I have never been more certain of anything. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Las Cruces. Willa wore a dress of pale blue cotton that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers from the desert woven into her hair. Zachary wore his best suit, which he admitted he had only worn 3 times before. Once when he bought the ranch, once at Miguel's daughter's wedding, and once at a funeral for a neighboring rancher. Miguel stood up as Zachary's best man, while Mrs. Henderson served as Willa's matron of honor, dabbing at her eyes throughout the ceremony. Carlos and Maria were there, along with Rosa and several other families Willa had befriended during her research. It was a small gathering, but warm and genuine, filled with people who truly cared about them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with such tenderness that Willa felt tears slip down her cheeks. This was real, she thought. This was her life now, married to this good man, building something new and unexpected in the harsh beauty of the New Mexico desert. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch, with everyone contributing food and drink. Miguel had strung lanterns around the yard, and someone brought a guitar for music. They danced under the stars, Willa's blue dress swirling around her legs, Zachary's hand firm at her waist. She had never been much of a dancer, but he led her confidently, and she found herself laughing with pure joy. Happy? He asked, his lips close to her ear. Deliriously, she replied. I did not know I could be this happy. When the guests finally left and they were alone in the ranch house, now their ranch house, Zachary carried her across the threshold despite her laughing protests that it was unnecessary. He set her down gently in the bedroom, which he had cleaned and prepared with obvious care. There were fresh sheets on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, and the window was open to let in the cool night air. Are you nervous? He asked, cupping her face gently. A little, Willa admitted. She was not entirely ignorant of what happened between married couples, but knowledge from books and whispered conversations was quite different from the reality of being alone with her husband, knowing what was about to happen. We can go slowly, Zachary said. We have all the time in the world now. There is no rush. But Willa found she did not want to go slowly. She wanted to be close to him, to seal this commitment they had made in the most intimate way possible. She reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers trembling only slightly. I love you, she said. I trust you. I want this. Zachary's eyes darkened with desire and love. I love you too, he said roughly, more than I have words to express." He leaned down and kissed her deeply as his hands found the buttons of her dress. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a careful exploration of each other, a learning of what brought pleasure and what made them both gasp with sensation. Zachary was patient and attentive, making sure Willa was comfortable, constantly asking if she was all right, if this was what she wanted. And Willa discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved deeply was a revelation, a joining that went beyond mere bodies to something profound and binding. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Willa's head on Zachary's chest, his arms around her. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and she felt utterly safe and content. "You are thinking loudly," Zachary murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "What is going through that brilliant mind?" "I am thinking about how unexpected this all is," Willa said. 6 months ago, I was in Boston, preparing for this expedition and assuming I would remain unmarried for life. I had made peace with that. And now here I am, married to a cowboy in New Mexico, deliriously happy and not quite believing this is real. "It is real," Zachary assured her. "You are stuck with me now, Mrs. Reeves." Mrs. Reeves. The name still felt strange but not unwelcome. "I kept my own name for professional purposes," she reminded him. "My publications will still be under Willa Zimmerman." "As they should be. You built your reputation under that name." "I would never ask you to give it up." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I confess I like the sound of you being Mrs. Reeves in private, just between us." "I like it too," Willa admitted, surprising herself. "I thought I would resist it more, but somehow it does not feel like losing myself. It feels like gaining something instead." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Willa slept more peacefully than she had in years. Married life suited them both. Willa moved most of her belongings from the boarding house to the ranch, though she kept a small room in town for when she needed to work late into the night on her notes or manuscripts. Zachary made space for her research in the house, clearing out an entire room to serve as her study and workroom. "You need a proper place to work," he insisted, helping her arrange her books and papers and specimen presses. "Somewhere with good light and enough space to spread everything out." The study became Willa's favorite room in the house. It had a large window facing east that caught the morning sun, and Zachary had built her a wide work table where she could lay out her samples and drawings. She spent hours there, cataloging and sketching and writing, while Zachary worked the ranch. But they always came together for meals, and most evenings they spent together, talking about their days and making plans for the future. Willa continued her botanical surveys, now with even more freedom since she did not have to worry about getting back to the boarding house by a certain time. Sometimes she would pack supplies and camp overnight in remote areas, though Zachary usually accompanied her on those trips. He had become quite good at identifying plants himself, and occasionally he would point out something she had missed or ask a question that led her to new insights. "You would have made a fine botanist yourself," she told him one day as they worked side by side, cataloging a meadow of late-blooming asters. "I am content being a rancher who is married to a brilliant botanist," Zachary replied with a grin. "Best of both worlds." Winter came to the high desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the landscape with white before melting away under the fierce sun. Willa worked on compiling her research into a comprehensive manuscript, writing and rewriting descriptions, perfecting her illustrations. It was painstaking work, but she loved every minute of it. "This will be my legacy," she told Zachary one night, looking at the growing stack of completed pages. "When I am gone, this will remain. People will use this book to understand this place, to appreciate it and protect it." That matters to me more than anything. It will be beautiful and important like you, Zachary said. I am proud of you, Willa, proud of your dedication and your brilliant mind. You are going to change how people see this land. In February, Willa realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She waited another few weeks to be certain, not wanting to raise false hopes, but when the signs continued, she finally broached the subject with Zachary. I think I might be pregnant, she said one morning over breakfast, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Zachary's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her, his face cycling through several expressions before settling on something like wonder. Truly, you are certain as I can be without a doctor confirming it, but all the signs are there. She reached for his hand. I know we talked about children being far in the future. This is sooner than we planned. Sooner, yes, but not unwelcome, not if you want it. Zachary squeezed her hand. How do you feel about it? Honestly, Willa considered the question carefully. Honestly. I am terrified and thrilled at the same time. I worried about how I would manage research and motherhood, but we have the ranch, we have help, and I have you. If I had to have a child with anyone, I cannot imagine a better partner than you. Zachary came around the table and pulled her into his arms. We will make it work, he promised. Whatever you need to continue your work, we will figure it out together. You are not giving up your dreams for this baby, you are just adding to them. The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Las Cruces a week later. Willa was healthy and strong, he told them, and should carry to term without problems. The baby would arrive sometime in late September or early October. Willa worked as long as she could, determined to complete her manuscript before the baby came. Zachary fussed over her constantly, trying to get her to rest more, but she brushed off his concerns. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time while still working, she said. I am not fragile, Zachary. I am just pregnant. Still, she appreciated his care, the way he made sure she ate well and got enough sleep, the way he took over more of the heavy work around the ranch. And when the summer heat became oppressive, and her back ached from carrying the growing child, he would rub her feet and shoulders without complaint, telling her stories to distract her from discomfort. In late September, Willa finished the last page of her botanical survey. She set down her pen and sat back, one hand on her swollen belly, the other resting on the thick stack of papers that represented nearly 18 months of intensive work. It is done, she said aloud, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over her. The manuscript would need to be typed up properly and submitted to publishers, but the research itself was complete. She had documented over 400 plant species, their descriptions, their uses, their habitats. It was comprehensive and thorough, and she knew it was good work. Important work. Zachary found her that way, sitting at her desk with her hand on the manuscript and tears streaming down her face. Willa, what is wrong? Is it the baby? Nothing is wrong, she assured him, laughing through her tears. I finished it. The survey is complete. I actually did it. He pulled her up gently and wrapped his arms around her as best he could with her pregnant belly between them. I never doubted you would, he said. You are remarkable, Willa Reeves. Absolutely remarkable. 2 weeks later, on a cool October morning, Willa's labor began. Maria came to help, along with a midwife from town, and Zachary paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, terrified and helpless. The labor was long but not overly difficult, and when their son finally entered the world with a powerful wail, Willa felt a surge of love so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. A boy, the midwife announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a soft blanket. A healthy, strong boy. They named him Thomas, after Zachary's father who had died when Zachary was young. Thomas William Reeves, his middle name taken from Willa. He was perfect, Willa thought, staring down at her son's tiny face. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs that worked impressively well based on his cries. Zachary held his son with such reverence, such wonder, that Willa felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. "He is beautiful," Zachary whispered. "He is perfect. Thank you, Willa. Thank you for this gift." "Our gift," Willa corrected softly. "He is ours together." The first months of motherhood were harder than Willa had anticipated. Thomas was a good baby, but he needed constant care and feeding, and Willa found herself exhausted in ways she had never experienced before. Her botanical work languished as she focused on learning to be a mother. But true to his word, Zachary was there every step of the way. He would take Thomas in the early mornings so Willa could sleep a bit longer. He learned to change diapers and soothe the baby when he cried. He brought Thomas to Willa when the baby was hungry, but then took him away again so she could rest. "You do not have to do all this," Willa said one night, watching Zachary pace the bedroom with Thomas against his shoulder, trying to burp him. "Most men would not." "I am not most men," Zachary said simply. "And you need your strength. Besides, I like this, having time with my son. I would not trade it for anything." Maria proved invaluable as well, offering to watch Thomas for a few hours each afternoon, so Willa could work on preparing her manuscript for publication. Those few hours became precious to Willa, time when she could immerse herself in her research, and remember that she was more than just a mother, that she still had work that mattered. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, they had established a routine that worked for all of them. Willa would wake early and work on her botanical projects before Thomas needed her. She would spend the middle part of the day with him, nursing and playing and marveling at how quickly he was growing. Then Maria would watch him in the afternoon, and Willa would work some more. Evenings were family time, all 3 of them together. Zachary seemed to thrive on fatherhood. He would hold Thomas on his hip while doing chores, talking to the baby constantly about everything from cattle prices to weather patterns. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving it from oak with surprising artistry. He was patient and tender and completely devoted to both his wife and his son. "You know," Willa said one evening as they sat together on the porch, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Zachary's arms, "I used to think love was something rare and difficult to find. I thought you had to choose between love and your dreams, that you could not have both." "And now," Zachary prompted, "now I know that real love does not ask you to choose. It gives you the freedom to be fully yourself while still being part of something bigger. You gave me that, Zachary. You are the rarest find of all." Zachary looked at her, his gray-green eyes soft with emotion. "That is how I feel about you. I spent years alone, convinced that my life would be just me and the ranch, working hard and getting by but never really living. Then you came into my life, this brilliant, passionate woman who saw something in me worth loving. You are my rare find, Willa. You and Thomas, you are my everything." Willa leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "We are quite lucky, are not we? The luckiest," Zachary agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. The manuscript was accepted by a major publisher in Boston in the spring of 1880. They wanted to publish Willa's botanical survey as a comprehensive reference work, with her detailed descriptions and illustrations. It would take about a year for the book to be printed and distributed, they told her, but they expected it to be well received by the scientific community. Willa was elated. This was validation of all her hard work, proof that her research had value beyond her own satisfaction. The advance payment they offered was modest, but enough to repay Zachary every penny he had invested in her work, with some left over. "I told you I would repay you," she said, placing the bank draft in his hands. Zachary looked at it, then tore it in half. I told you it was not a loan. It was an investment in us and our future together. I do not want repayment. Zachary, this is nearly $600. That is a fortune for us. Then put it aside for Thomas's education, or use it for your next research project, or save it for a rainy day. But I am not taking it as payment for something I gave freely out of love. He pulled her close. Your success is my success. Your dreams fulfilled are my dreams fulfilled. That is what partnership means. Willa stopped arguing and simply held him, overwhelmed once again by how thoroughly this man understood her, how completely he supported her. She had won the gamble of her life when she had accepted his proposal. She knew that with absolute certainty. Life settled into a comfortable pattern over the next few years. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic child who loved following his father around the ranch and bringing his mother interesting rocks and leaves. "Is this a special plant, Mama?" became his constant refrain, and Willa would dutifully examine whatever he had found and tell him about it. "You are creating a little scientist," Zachary observed one day, watching Thomas carefully transplant a small cactus into a pot under Willa's guidance. "I am creating a child who pays attention to the world around him," Willa corrected. "What he does with that curiosity is up to him, but I hope we are teaching him to see beauty and complexity in nature, yes." When Thomas was 3, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy felt easier somehow, even though she was chasing after a toddler while carrying another child. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, arriving quickly and with much less drama than Thomas's birth. They named her Rose, after the old Mexican woman who had taught Willa so much about desert plants. Little Rose was as different from Thomas as could be, quiet where he was loud, contemplative where he was energetic. Zachary doted on her completely, carrying her everywhere and singing to her in his rough voice. "You have gone soft," Miguel teased one day, finding Zachary mending tack with Rose asleep in a sling on his chest. "The fierce cowboy I used to know has turned into a nursemaid." "The fiercest cowboy I know," Zachary replied with dignity, "is the one who can run a ranch, raise cattle, and care for his children all at the same time. If you think that is soft, you try it." Miguel laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "You are right, my friend, you are right. And you are blessed. 2 beautiful children and a wife who loves you. What more could a man want?" "Nothing," Zachary said simply. "I have everything I could ever need right here." Willa's book was published in the spring of 1881 and was received even better than she had hoped. Reviews in scientific journals praised her thoroughness and the clarity of her writing. Several universities wrote to request that she send them copies for their libraries. A women's college in New York invited her to come give a lecture series about her work. She declined the lecture series, not wanting to be away from her family for that long, but she did agree to write a series of articles about desert plant life for a popular magazine. The articles were a success, and suddenly, Willa found herself with a modest reputation as both a serious scientist and a science writer. "You are famous," Zachary said, only partly teasing, when another letter arrived inviting her to contribute to a new botanical encyclopedia. "Not famous, just recognized," Willa corrected. "But yes, it is wonderful to have my work acknowledged. I feel as though I have proven that a woman can do serious scientific research, that we have valuable contributions to make. Maybe other women will see that and feel encouraged to pursue their own dreams." As Thomas and Rose grew, Willa began a new project, documenting the medicinal uses of desert plants, working closely with Rosa and other traditional healers in the area. This research was perhaps even more important than her first survey, she thought, because it was in danger of being lost as the old ways gave way to modern medicine, and younger generations moved away from the land. Zachary supported this work as enthusiastically as he had her original research, even though it meant Willa sometimes spent days away from home, living in other communities to learn from the healers there. He managed the children and the ranch without complaint, sending her off with supplies and kisses and instructions to learn as much as she could. "How did I get so lucky as to marry you?" Willa asked him once on one of her returns home, finding him teaching Thomas and Rose how to identify animal tracks in the dirt. "You nearly got crushed by a boulder," Zachary replied with a grin. "Some might say that was pretty unlucky. I was just the silver lining." "The best silver lining imaginable," Willa said, pulling him in for a kiss that made the children giggle and cover their eyes. The years passed in a blur of love and work and family. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved both ranching and learning. Rose was quieter but equally curious, spending hours drawing the plants and animals she observed. They added on to the ranch house, building more bedrooms and expanding Willa's study. They bought more land as they could afford it, slowly building the ranch into something more substantial. Miguel eventually retired, though he and his family remained close friends. Carlos took over as Zachary's main hand, and eventually brought in his own sons to help with the work. The ranch became a thriving operation, known for quality cattle and good horses. Willa published 2 more books over the years, her study of medicinal plants and a guide to desert gardening that became popular with settlers new to the territory. She also mentored several young women who wrote to her seeking advice on pursuing careers in science. Though she never took a formal teaching position, she considered this mentoring one of her most important contributions. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Willa back to the canyon where they had first met, where the rockslide had nearly killed her and he had saved her life. The area looked different now, vegetation having grown over the scar left by the fallen rocks. They stood together looking at the place, hands clasped, remembering. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been there that day?" Willa asked. "If you had not seen me in the canyon or had decided not to investigate, I would have lost the best thing that ever happened to me," Zachary said. "I would have gone on living a half-life, alone and lonely, and not even realizing what I was missing. So yes, I think about it sometimes, and every time I do, I thank God I was in the right place at the right time. I tell people I came to New Mexico to study plants," Willa said softly, "but I think maybe I came here to find you, to find this life we have built together." The plants were just the excuse. Zachary pulled her close, and they stood there for a long time, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. 15 years, Zachary mused. It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I can barely remember my life before this. It is as though everything that came before was just preparation for this for us." They walked back to their horses slowly, in no hurry to return to the world beyond the canyon. Copper and Sage, both showing their age now with gray in their coats, waited patiently. "You have any regrets?" Zachary asked as they prepared to mount. "Things you wish you had done differently?" Willa thought about it seriously, then shook her head. "No, I have my work, my family, and my love. What more could anyone want? I have everything I dreamed of and more that I never knew to dream of. Do you have regrets?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Zachary said. "But then again, maybe we needed to become who we were before we could be right for each other. You needed to be the brilliant, independent woman who knew her own mind. I needed to be the man who could appreciate that and support it. So no regrets, just gratitude for what we have." They rode home together through the golden afternoon light, and Willa reflected on the strange and wonderful journey her life had taken. She had come to New Mexico seeking knowledge about plants, driven by scientific curiosity and a desire to prove herself. She had found all that, but she had also found something she had not been looking for. Love that did not constrain but freed, partnership that enhanced rather than diminished, a man who saw her completely and loved her all the more for it. Thomas and Rose were playing in the yard when they arrived home, their laughter carrying on the desert breeze. The ranch looked peaceful and prosperous in the late afternoon light. This was home, Willa thought. Not the house in Boston where she had grown up, not any place she had been before. This dusty desert ranch with its sturdy adobe buildings and endless sky, this was where she belonged. Zachary must have sensed her thoughts because he reached over and took her hand. "Happy?" he asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Deliriously," she replied, as she always did. And it was true. After everything they had been through, all the challenges and changes and growth, she was deeply, contentedly happy. The children ran over to greet them, talking excitedly about everything they had done that day. Zachary swung Rose up onto his shoulders, while Thomas helped Willa down from her horse. They walked toward the house together, a family complete and whole, and Willa sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the rockslide that had nearly ended her life, but instead had led her to this, to everything that mattered most. That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Willa and Zachary sat together on their porch as they did most evenings, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The desert night was cool and peaceful, filled with the small sounds of crickets and the distant call of coyotes. "I was thinking," Willa said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about that first day when you pulled me out from under that boulder. Do you remember what you said? I asked if you were hurt. After that, you said something about the desert having its dangers, about it not being a forgiving place for the unprepared. Do you remember?" Zachary nodded. "I remember thinking you were so focused on those flowers that you had no idea how much danger you were in. It worried me. I was unprepared," Willa admitted. "Not just for the rockslide, but for everything that would follow. I came here thinking I would spend a few months studying plants and then return to Boston, mission accomplished. I was not prepared to fall in love. I was not prepared to find a home. I was not prepared for any of this, really. But it was the best lack of preparation of my life." Zachary smiled and pulled her closer. "I was unprepared too. I thought my life was set, that I would live and die on this ranch, alone and content enough. I was not looking for love. But then this stubborn, brilliant woman nearly got herself killed in my canyon, and suddenly my whole world changed. You changed everything, Willa. You brought color and meaning and joy to what had been a pretty gray existence." "We saved each other," Willa said softly. "You saved my life that day, but I think maybe I saved yours too in a different way. We gave each other permission to be more than we were, to reach for more than we thought we deserved." "That is the truth," Zachary agreed. "Before you, I was just surviving. After you, I started living. There is a difference, and it is everything." They sat in silence for a while longer, wrapped in each other's arms and the peace of the night. Willa thought about how far they had come, how much they had built together. Her books were changing how people understood and valued the desert ecosystem. Zachary's ranch was thriving and providing a good life for their family. Their children were healthy and happy, growing up with curiosity and confidence. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had dared to dream. And it had all started with a moment of danger, and a cowboy brave enough to ride into falling rocks to save a woman he did not even know. "You know," Willa said, struck by a sudden realization, I have spent 15 years studying the plants of this desert, cataloging and describing and trying to understand them. I have found some truly rare species, things that grow nowhere else in the world. Beautiful, unique plants that took millions of years to evolve. I know, your work has been important, but you are the rarest find of all, Willa said, turning to face him fully. A man who sees a woman's strength as something to celebrate rather than threaten. A man who supports his wife's dreams as enthusiastically as his own. A man who understands that love is not about possession or control but about freedom and partnership. You are rarer than any plant I have ever discovered, Zachary Reeves, and I am so grateful I found you. Zachary's eyes shone with emotion in the starlight. You found me, he said roughly. Or maybe we found each other. Either way, I am the lucky one. You are extraordinary, Willa. You always have been. All I did was recognize what was right in front of me and have the sense not to let you go. That took wisdom, though, Willa pointed out. Many men would not have had that wisdom. They would have tried to change me to make me fit into what they thought a wife should be. But you never did that. You loved me as I was and helped me become even more myself. That is the gift you gave me, and it is beyond price. Zachary kissed her then, slow and deep, a kiss that spoke of 15 years of love and trust and growing together. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We should get inside. Early morning tomorrow, and Thomas wants to help me move the cattle to the north pasture. He is so much like you, Willa said fondly. Already a rancher at heart. And Rose is like you, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things work. We made good children together. We did. We do. Willa stood and took his hand. Come on then, let us get some rest. Tomorrow is another day of this beautiful life we have built. They walked inside together, closing the door on the night. The ranch settled into quiet darkness, but it was a peaceful darkness, full of love and safety and the promise of tomorrow. In her study, Willa's books sat on a shelf, proof of her contribution to science. In the barn, Zachary's horses and cattle represented his hard work and dedication. In their children's rooms, Thomas and Rose slept peacefully, the next generation of Reeves ready to make their own mark on the world. And in their bedroom, Willa and Zachary held each other close, grateful for every day they had together and looking forward to all the days yet to come. The story that had begun with a rockslide and a rescue had become something neither of them could have predicted. A true partnership, a deep love, a life that honored both of their dreams. And as Willa drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought once more about that first day, about how close she had come to death, and how thoroughly that brush with mortality had changed her life. She had come to New Mexico seeking rare plants. Instead, she had found something infinitely more precious, a love that made her more fully herself, a partner who walked beside her rather than trying to lead or follow, and a home that welcomed all of who she was. She had found the rarest treasure of all in the form of a quiet cowboy who understood that real strength lay in supporting others' strengths rather than trying to diminish them. It was, she thought as she fell asleep, the perfect ending to what had started as a near tragedy. Or rather, it was not an ending at all but a continuation, a daily choosing of love and partnership, and the beautiful life they were building together in the wild, harsh, magnificent New Mexico desert. Zachary held his wife close and smiled in the darkness, thinking how grateful he was that he had been in that canyon on that particular day, that he had seen the danger in time, that he had been fast enough and strong enough to pull this remarkable woman to safety. That moment had changed everything, had given him a life he had not known he wanted, but now could not imagine living without. They were the rarest of finds, he thought. These two people who had somehow found each other in the vastness of the desert, and recognized in each other something precious worth keeping. And every day they woke up and chose each other again, building on what they had started, growing deeper in love and partnership. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.